Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamo Sword Channel. I'm David, and today on Dynamo Sword Channel I will be reviewing the Windlass and Royal Armouries 14th century longsword. So how does this sword fare amongst other swords in its price range, as well as hold up to the historical original it's based on? Well, stay tuned, we'll find out. This sword classifies as a Type 15A in the oakshot typology. The Type 15A was a subtype of the standard 15, denoted by the 15A being of hand and a half to longsword in proportion to the more standard single-handed arming sword Type 15. It seems the Type 15 was first developed in the later 13th century. Now, what makes the Type 15 stand out amongst other blade types of the typology is its very narrow and strongly acute profile, ending in a needle-like tip. Now, the Type 15 was the pinnacle of thrusting swords in the medieval period. It featured a strong diamond cross-section to promote rigidity, adding to its thrusting capabilities while still retaining as much blade body as possible to retain some cutting capability. Now, the 15A was designed at a time when armor was gaining strength and prominence around the continent of Europe. This carried well into the 15th and mid-16th centuries until firearms took over as the primary weapon of the battlefield. The Type 15 was popular and a long-lasting blade type, one of the most long-lasting of the typology, seeing use from the late 13th century and, as mentioned, well into the later part of the 16th, and even in certain circumstances, even the 17th, because when you see a lot of the side sword or military rapier blades, they are very similar to a Type 15. This just kind of shows just how popular and useful this sword type was against its proposed opponent, plate armor, as well as just being very versatile with its focus on the thrust. Now, in regards to the sword's hilt configuration would classify it into the Family D of oakshot sword families. Now, the Family D is classified as having a large wheel pommel, normally of types I, J, or K, with the straight up curved guard of style 8 as seen here. Now, the Family D is almost exclusive to the Type 15A swords, but a few swords of types 18A and 18B also fit the family as well. The 15 and the 15A would also fit by blade into Group 2 of oakshot's sword groups. Group 2 is where we see swords transition from cut-focused blade types to the more thrust and or cut and thrust focused blade types. As can be seen, it's not hard to understand why the Type 15A would fit in this group. But it's worth noting that the Type 15 is technically, you could say, the forefather of the group, being the first sword type to not only focus on thrusting capability to such an extent, but also kind of when you look at the sword group, it is the first sword featured in Group 2. So you add those together, and it just being kind of where you start seeing that transition from Group 1 to Group 2, but also, again, there's only two as sharply acute blade types in Group 2 or in the general oakshot typology, those being the 15 and, of course, the Type 17, which both share very similar traits, but overall, what really differentiates them is cross section, as 15s were prominently diamond, and the 17 either featured prominent hexagonal cross sections or a transitional hexagonal to diamond cross section. So in regards to this specific sword, it is a direct replica of a 14th century sword found in Lake Constance, and it has been dated to be forged around 1365. Now, Lake Constance borders Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, and it is presumed that this sword is of German origin and is unique and rather thick compared to other blades or 15A type blades. It does have a near twin of English origin, supposed to be the sword of Edward, the Black Prince of Wales, the son of King Edward III. Now, as well, there are two others. One that was found in the River Thames in England, and then one more that is pretty near identical to this one as well, that was found just south of this sword's find in Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. Now, again, all of them have the unique wheel pommel with jutted boss, style 8 guard, and then the uniquely thick and strongly diamond blade profiles. As we see in its title, this sword is in the collection of the Royal Armouries in Leeds, England, and has been in their possession since the mid-1960s. Now, it is one of 6 swords featured in a collection of direct replicas made by Windlass Steelcrafts for the Royal Armouries. Now, in closing, overall, the Type 15 is a very attractive sword, showing how varied the swords of the medieval period were, with purposive focus regarding capability on the battlefield. Now, its design harkens back to the thrust-focused and diamond cross-sectioned Roman gladius and spatha, as well as the Celtic Hallstatt swords of the BC periods. Seeing, again, future inspiration in the late 15th and 16th century with the side sword and rapier, with their more thrust-focused blade profiles. Now, the Type 15 and its two-handed subtype, the 15A, were indeed one of the most used and inspiring swords or sword types of Europe, and honestly, personally, one of my favorites. So now let's look at the overall statistics of this sword. So its overall length is 44 inches. It has a weight at 4 pounds with a point of balance right at 3 inches from the hilt. Now, the center of percussion is right at about 20.5 inches from the hilt, and its class is what I would consider a long sword. Now, the overall blade length is 34 inches. It has a base blade width of 1 3/4 inches, and that strongly tapers to 3/8 of an inch at the tip. And the material is a 1080 high carbon steel, and it has a nice satin polish. The cross section is a prominent diamond. And as we discussed earlier, the blade type is what would be known as a Type 15A in the oakshot typology. So the guard's total length is 10 1/4 inches. The quillion dimensions, kind of at the inclusion here, is a 1/2 inch, and then that tapers down to a 1/4 inch at the terminals, and then its base body is 3/8 of an inch, tapering to a 1/4 of an inch at the terminals. And the material is a mild steel, and it features a nicely finished satin polish as well. Now, as we discussed earlier with its sword family, the style of guard is what would be known as a Style 8 in the oakshot typology. The handle's total length is 6 3/4 inches. It has a base circumference at the guard of 3 3/4 inches, and that moderately tapers, not so much, to about 3 1/4 inches at the pommel. The material is a nice wood core, and the grip material is a textured black leather with a nice 3 riser configuration. Now the pommel's total length is 2 3/4 inches, and that includes the peen block. The pommel width is 2 7/8 of an inch, so it's pretty much full circle minus the addition that I added of the peen block. Its thickness is starts kind of at 1/2 an inch, and then that slightly tapers to 3/8 of an inch at the top. So it does have some nice, slight tapering to it, thickness. Its overall circumference, counting the bosses, is 7 inches, and then it's kind of more half shot circumference from handle to handle is 5 inches. Now the material, like the guard, is a mild steel, and it has a nice satin finish that matches the whole aesthetic of the sword. The hilt construction, again, is peened, and it features that nicely finished peen block at the top. Now the pommel type is a very unique and thick-bodied Type J in the oakshot typology. Now most Type Js, and if you've seen any of my other reviews, because there are a few swords that I own with Type J pommels, usually the boss isn't so pronounced. Now, one thing that I did kind of think when I first saw this sword and kind of argued was, well, it's more like a Type K, because a Type K has a more protruding boss. But the big difference between a K and a J is the general shape of the pommel, as Type Ks tend to be a lot wider and just a larger face-bodied pommel, to where this one's just not so, and it just has these really unique and very unique to this kind of sword design. As I mentioned, there's other family D swords that feature this unique pommel, where they're almost like a family of swords themselves. So yeah, so definitely more Type J, even though it does have similarities to a Type K. So this sword does feature a scabbard that comes with it. The scabbard is wood core, and it is finished with a nice black leather overwrap. Now it features a stitched rain guard and a single riser at the top of the scabbard. It is finished with a nice and attractive ball-pointed brass chape with a kind of a spade-like design that is unique to these Royal Armoury swords. It is a really nice and well-made scabbard. Unfortunately, its fit isn't so great. It really has no friction fit, unfortunately, and as you can see, will shake around and come out. Of course, that means no up downward friction fit whatsoever either. So that's definitely a downer when it comes to its fit. There is also, you know, a little slight rattle to it. So that is kind of disappointing as well. So the fit isn't so great. You know, I mean, it can be shimmed and stuff. So, you know, it's not super horrible and easily remedied, but still kind of a downside because that's, you know, two of these Royal Armory scabbards that just don't fit as tight as I would like for the price point. But again, you know, the benefit of this one is that it's nice, sturdy, strong. You know, again, the rain guard is stitched very well as the back seam. So nice stitching. It's not going to come loose or fall apart, especially the rain guard, which sometimes you can see on cheaper scabbards with rain guards. So this one's done really well. I'm really impressed with that. You know, again, as I mentioned, the brass shape is nice. It's fitted well, no dents or marks or anything ugly about it. So that's a bonus too. Overall, again, a nice scabbard that just, again, would just benefit from having a little better friction fit and overall just fit in general. This sword is, as mentioned, a part of a collaborative effort between the Royal Armouries of Leeds, England, and Windlass Steelcrafts of India to replicate specific swords in the Royal Armouries collection. Now, each sword is built and based on the exact statistics of the historical original that it is based on. It is then inspected and certified by curators from the Royal Armouries, as well as given a certificate of authenticity from the current master of the armories. Now, each prototype has also been sent to Matt Easton of Scala Gladiatoria for review to ensure the sword's fit and finish and handling were up to the expectations of a historical European martial arts practitioner before the final inspection by the curators of the Royal Armouries. Now, each sword comes in a nicely designed and sturdy display box, and included are its certificate of authenticity, as well as a tin of polishing wax and a polishing cloth for cleaning and maintaining the blade and hilt. This sword overall has a nice fit and finish that accentuates the design and function of this sword. Now, regarding the blade, it is excellently forged and the lines are all crisp and even. It features a prominent diamond cross section with a very pronounced midrib. Now, there isn't much blade width at the base, and the blade strongly tapers to that acute point. Now, these might be cons to some that are more, you know, kind of focused on a cutting sword. But again, these are key characteristics of the Type 15 or specifically 15A that this sword replicates. Now, this blade's purpose is again to pierce and gap plate mail, and its design shows this prominently. It is very thick and has, you know, barely any flex to it whatsoever. I don't even think I can flex it. Yeah, I can't even flex it with my arms. So, you know, again, big, thick, sturdy blade. Now, again, this benefits the user of the sword with strong thrusts and half sorting, but this does, again, detract from its cutting capability. Now, it's not that this sword can't cut, as it is definitely well more than capable of cutting and just doing deadly shearing cuts to unarmored opponents. But again, its primary purpose is thrusting, and its design offers that at a deadly capacity. Now, moving to the hilt, you know, the guard is very well cast and is a near exact replica of the original. Now, as mentioned earlier, it is of Style 8 in the oakshot typology. And what really defined the Style 8 was its very straight and long quillions of either a rounded or triangular cross section, and then its very short and jutted upturned terminals. These terminals benefited the user as one could trap an opposing weapon and potentially disarm the opponent, while also offering adequate length to defend the hand and forearm. Now it is seated into the blade very well, and there is very little gap, and the shoulders rest evenly and flush. Overall, it is a very well made and attractive guard. Now the handle and grip are very well made too. This, I feel, is one of the few liberties that was taken with this sword's design, as the original was lacking its grip upon finding it, and at some point a new handle of wood was added to the sword with a simple cord overwrap as a grip material. Now, I do appreciate that this sword was given this liberty to the grip, as the original's regrip is crude and, in my opinion, unattractive. This one features a wood core that is nice and oblong in shape, with an overwrap of black leather that is textured, and then features a nice 3-riser configuration. It feels very good in the hand and is finished very nicely. Now, the pommel is definitely the true highlight of this sword, as it features a unique and almost odd variant of a Type J in the oakshot typology. Now, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but we'll kind of go over it again. What sets this pommel apart from other Type J pommels is the long and thick protruding central bosses. Now, it is similar almost to the protruding boss of a Type K, but does lack the flatter and wider outer pommel wheel that type has as a prominent feature. This pommel is very large and very thick. And some might be turned off by this, but I see it as a functional feature of the pommel more so than simply a unique or style-centric design. I mean, for example, when you handle this sword two-handed, the bottom of your hand firmly butts to the boss of that pommel. And this allows you to firmly thrust the sword without worrying about your hand, sliding off, which can happen with, certain scent stopper pommels or even flatter wheel pommels. So this kind of gives a nice three-dimensional kind of squared block to keep your hand where it needs to be. Now, one of the things, like I said, again, when you're thrusting with this sword, and even when you're pulling out, you don't want to have to lose the sword by sliding your hand. So this is a definite design feature to keep your hand firmly placed on the pommel and not to lose your grip. Now, the other thing, the other examples of this sword also too feature the protruding bosses, but at least from what I've seen in pics, this one definitely features a much more broader and stronger focus on it. So that might just be because of the pictures, but primarily the most I've seen is Prince Edward's sword, and his also have little inclusions into the bosses that have like a little coat, a little cross in it to kind of denote him, but they don't just seem just as thick. They seem a little more into the pommel and less protruding. So yeah, that is definitely one of the unique features on this Lake Constant sword. Now, overall, I think this sword has a very well crafted fit and finish, and this model is extremely top notch. Um, it is beautiful, and again, a prime example of a 14th to 15th century hand and a half sword that really had more prominent focus on its battlefield use, with the overall blade thickness and just how sturdy and kind of more focused it is on armor over just your average opponent. So with handling of this sword, I mean, I wouldn't be entirely honest if I didn't say that this sword probably isn't for everyone. It is rather thick, and at 4 pounds it is pretty heavy compared to most other cut and thrust swords of its type, or in the wheelhouse regarding cut and thrust swords such as um, type 16As, 18As, 18Bs, things like that. I mean, even comparatively to the larger 15th century longsword that I've reviewed earlier, which is a Type 17. This sword is, even though it's a little shorter, a lot heavier and a lot thicker, which kind of contradicts my idea of what the 17 was compared to the 15A, because I always looked at the 17 as being a little more focused. I mean, I kind of emphasized sharpened crowbar. If you watched my previous review of the Type 17, and this one is definitely more crowbar than that sword because it's thicker. It's definitely has more of a pronounced midrib, much more thicker cross section, and and that's just kind of something unique. Now, one thing about the 17s is that they tried to maybe circumstance, and maybe that's why they got lighter, and they did feel a little heavier, less heavy, I mean, than this sword, because they went to that hexagonal cross section. So yeah, I would say that definitely the 17, since it did come a little later than the 15, 15A would have been definitely much more advanced. They started kind of using that hexagonal cross section on a lot of swords, the Type 17, Type 19s, Type 20s, and things like that as they moved into the 15th and 16th centuries. So definitely just a different change on handling. So with that out of the way, you really got to focus on the primary purpose of this sword. And again, much like the 17, this sword was built to wrench and pierce through armor worn at its time of use. Now, what it lacks in kind of finesse as a, maybe a dueling weapon, it makes up for in just general brute strength and just tenacity. I mean, this sword begs to be used in a half sorting position, and its thick body and its prominent diamond cross section definitely give it, at least to me, an appearance of almost near indestructibility. I mean, this thing just feels like it could stab through or even get whacked against anything, and just is so thick and strong that it's going to take it. Its feel in hand, again, I mean, it's 4 pounds, but it's not that heavy. I mean, it's really well balanced. It feels good, one or two-handed. I mean, it's not a light, fencing sword, but, I don't have issues moving it, like you would think. So honestly, the handling, I'm impressed by it. For being a 4-pound sword that's thick and sturdy, it handles really well. I don't get tired holding this sword. It's not as fast as other swords, but it's definitely not cumbersome. And again, once you go into those half sorting, positions, it really just, you don't feel that weight anyway, because you got the blade held half, and you're just able to just move it around as you see fit. Now, regarding the durability, I don't think I've ever owned or handled a sword really this thick that wasn't unintentionally this thick. I mean, I'll know a lot, and I talk about it in some of my discussion topics and things about, the old sharpened crowbar of the 2010s, like the Gen 2 swords and things like that. The old Ronin katana Euros that just were focused on thickness, and that thickness is what they focused on for durability. But again, they just don't have the balance and harmonics that this sword has, and that just kind of goes to show that a sword can be too thick and too poorly balanced, and that'll affect its performance, no matter if it can break cinder blocks or not. And that's what I really want to give this sword benefit to, or at least the swordsmith of 1365 or ish that made this and designed this sword. I mean, there's not enough respect that's given, I don't think, to the European swordsmith. And I know, everybody wants, the Japanese and their craft, but really, when you look at typologies and European typologies, and you look at, what these guys did, and as far as just, blade typologies and specific geometries and weight and balance that varied from sword to sword, even in typology specific swords, 115 might not be the same as the other. And there was always a purpose, because you felt like, the sword was either made for the person and by their request, or it was made in idea of what that person would be facing. And I think that is a good, familiar relationship that I think nobles and lords had, and even knights had, with, their weapon and armor smiths. They were able to go in and discuss, and it's something that I guess we don't really have the privy to. I mean, there are a lot of great custom smiths in the, in the sword market today, and we're able to, kind of give them our ideas and build something together. But, it's different when you're doing it for a hobby, and something that, when the relationship is, hey, I'm relying on you to save my life. And, that guy's got, the smith has to weigh on, well, if I don't make something right, I could potentially kill my lord or this man at arms. And, it's got to weigh on the relationship. So, odd in the middle ramble, but that just popped into my head as I was doing this review. And I thought that, it was kind of important, because I know we give a lot of criticism on certain sword, historical examples and historical replicas about how it's not what I would really like. Well, honestly, with these type of one-to-one swords, it wasn't made for us. It was made for a specific him, a specific person, a specific knight, a specific lord, or man at arms. And that's who used this until, they either lost it or died, or it was handed down or buried with them, whatever happened to the sword, when we find them in the modern history. But anyway, back to durability. I would say that this sword definitely, like I said, it feels like it could pierce through anything. And I know it can. I'm not going to go and try to beat this sword up and do any destructive testing. But, I think it would hold up pretty fairly to, what it was supposed to pierce into, gambeson, mail, in between, plate armors, maybe even puncture weaker portions and sections of plate armor. This sword, just, again, its durability, handling, and things, I'm just very impressed. I really like this sword. the history of it. Again, I might be a little biased because, as I mentioned a little earlier in the review, I am a big fan of kind of the more thrust focused swords like the 15 and 17. I just think that they don't get enough credit in the modern era, because I know a lot of guys that collect and practice using swords, they kind of more focus, with functional swords on cutting competition. So obviously this guy ain't going to win any cutting competitions. But if there was a really cool thrusting competition, yeah, bring this guy. Leave your 13A at home or your 18C at home. Bring this guy. But anyway, again, yeah, very good durability, and I almost feel that, yeah, this one could, pierce or thrust through just about anything. So in closing, because I probably rambled on a little too long, sorry guys, but if you're still with us, thanks for watching and enjoying the review. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect from this sword. I kind of kept myself in the dark with this one, as I kind of tossed around, initially when the Royal Armory swords first came out, which one I wanted to purchase. Um, you know, Initially I opted for the 15th century longsword that I reviewed earlier on the channel, simply based on the fact that, you know, um, the merits that I gave it in the review, which is basically seeing a functional and true Type 17, under $1,000. The Type 17 is definitely a sword type that you just don't see much in the production sword market, or at least if you do, they're just not done right, because they don't really have that focused hexagonal cross section. But I always knew I wanted this sword, um, too. And after handling it, I am very happy with this sword and love its battlefield focus and its thick, no nonsense design. I mean, personally, I highly recommend this sword for anyone looking for a thrust focused sword of war, or one of exact and, again, purposeful historical design. Well, I think that's going to be it for this review. I hope you enjoyed viewing it and it helps with your opinions on this sword. Now be sure to like and subscribe, as well as look for future content from Dynamo Sword channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.